Have you ever looked at your sleeping partner under the dim glow of the moonlight and wondered if the entire life you built together is just a beautifully crafted lie? It is a terrifying thought, the kind that claws at the back of your mind, in the dead of night, turning your blood into ice. You want to shake it off. You want to tell yourself that you are just being paranoid, that the woman who holds your hand at the dinner table and kisses your forehead before bed is exactly who she claims to be. But sometimes your gut knows the truth long before your eyes are ready to see it. Before I dive into the darkest chapter of my life, I want to ask you a question. If you saw your spouse hiding their screen from you every single day, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait for the pieces to fall into place? Let me know in the comments below where you are watching or listening to this from. I love connecting with you all, and your stories always remind me that none of us are truly alone in our struggles. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me continue sharing these deeply personal, raw moments with you. My name is Julian. For the past 5 years, I've worked as a custom furniture maker in a small, quiet town just outside of Portland, Oregon. It is the kind of job that requires patience, precision, and an absolute trust in your raw materials. You look at a rough, weathered piece of oak, and you spend weeks sanding, shaping, and polishing it until it reveals its true beauty. I used to think marriages were built the exact same way. I believed that if you poured enough honest labor, late nights, and unconditional love into a relationship, it would withstand any storm. My wife Clara was the centerpiece of my world. She is a child therapist, a woman whose entire career is dedicated to healing broken spirits and bringing light into the darkest corners of young minds. When I first met her, I was just a guy with a dusty workshop and a mountain of debt trying to make a name for himself. She didn't care about the empty bank account or the calluses on my hands. She saw me. She believed in my dream before I even had the courage to call it a dream. Together we built a life that felt like a sanctuary. We bought a modest, beautiful wood frame house surrounded by towering pine trees. On rainy Oregon evenings, the sound of water drumming against the roof and the gentle creak of the old floorboards felt like a lullaby. A little over 3 years ago, our daughter was born a perfect little girl who inherited her mother's bright, empathetic eyes. Clara was an incredible mother, balancing her demanding clinic hours with a fierce, protective devotion to our family. There was a rhythm to our days, a comfortable, predictable warmth that I thanked God for every single night. I felt like the luckiest man alive. I had a thriving business, a beautiful home, and a wife who was my anchor, my confidant, and my best friend. But shadows have a way of creeping into even the brightest rooms so slowly that you don't realize you're standing in the dark until the cold hits your bones. It started about a month ago. A month ago, my younger brother, Leo, moved back to town. Leo has always been the wild card in our family. While I was content staying in our hometown, working with my hands, Leo was always chasing the next big thing, the next quick dollar, the next escape. He had spent the last few years bouncing between major cities, burning bridges, and disappearing for months at a time. When he called me out of the blue, sounding desperate, broken, and completely broke, my brotherly instincts kicked in. He asked if he could stay in the small guest house at the back of our property for a little while, just until he found a steady job and got back on his feet. I didn't hesitate. I talked to Clara, and though she seemed slightly hesitant at first, her natural empathy won over. She agreed that family comes first. We cleaned up the guest house, set him up with fresh linens, and welcomed him into our space. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed fine. Leo would come over to the main house for dinner, help me chop firewood, and play with our daughter in the yard. But around that exact same time, a subtle freezing shift began to happen inside my own home, specifically within my wife. The first time I noticed it was a Tuesday. I woke up in the middle of the night, throat dry, needing a glass of water. As I rolled over, the room wasn't dark. A sharp, piercing blue light was cutting through the shadows, illuminating Clara's face. She was sitting up against the headboard, staring intensely at her phone. Her eyes were wide-strained and filled with an expression I had never seen on her face before, a mixture of profound dread and frantic urgency. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, and muttered her name. "Clara, everything okay?" The reaction was instantaneous. Her entire body jerked as if she had been shocked by a live wire. In one swift, panicked motion, she slammed the phone face down onto the nightstand. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. She swallowed hard, trying to force a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and cleared her throat. "Yeah, honey, it's nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Just a spam email. Some automated medical advertisement from the clinic's network. They always send these updates at the worst hours because of the server maintenance. Go back to sleep." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I glanced at the digital clock on our nightstand. The bright red numbers read exactly 2:13 a.m. I nodded, told her to try to get some rest, and went to get my water. But as I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window into the black, rainy yard, a tiny seed of unease was planted in my chest. Over the next 2 weeks, that tiny seed grew into a suffocating vine. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Every single night without fail, my eyes would snap open in the darkness, driven by a sudden subconscious alert. And every single time, the clock read 2:13 a.m. And every single time, Clara's face was illuminated by that cold blue screen. Her thumbs would fly across the glass, typing furiously, before she would notice me moving and violently hide the phone beneath her pillow or press it face down against the wood. The excuses began to wear thin. First, it was automated advertisements. Then, it was a glitching calendar notification from her office. Then it was an online shopping subscription she forgot to cancel. But her behavior outside of the bedroom was changing, too, confirming that whatever was happening at 2:13 a.m. was bleeding into our actual reality. Clara, the woman who used to leave her phone carelessly on the kitchen counter or let our daughter play games on it, suddenly became intensely, aggressively protective of the device. She changed her passcode. I found out when I tried to pick it up to check the weather one morning, and the old pattern didn't work. When I asked her about it, she laughed nervously, claiming her clinic had implemented strict new privacy laws for patient-therapist data, forcing her to secure all her personal devices. She started taking her phone with her everywhere, into the bathroom, out to the mailbox. Even when she went into the backyard to throw away the trash, the phone was clutched tightly in her palm or shoved deep into her pocket. The warmth in our house began to evaporate, replaced by a tense, fragile politeness. When we sat down for dinner with Leo, Clara would barely look up from her plate. She seemed entirely detached, her mind hovering miles away in some dark, stressful place. She was losing weight, the dark circles under her eyes deepening with every passing day. When I tried to hold her hand or wrap my arms around her from behind while she washed the dishes, her muscles would instantly tighten and she would gently but firmly step away, making an excuse about being overwhelmed by her caseload at work. I began to feel a toxic mixture of self-doubt, anger, and heartbreak. I am a man who prides himself on stability, on being able to fix things when they break. But you cannot fix a leak if you don't know where the water is coming from. I started wondering if I was losing her. Had she grown tired of our quiet suburban life? Was she pulling away because she realized I wasn't enough for her anymore? The thoughts twisted in my brain, keeping me awake long before the 2:13 a.m. alarm went off in my mind. I watched her closely, analyzing every blink, every sigh, every text tone that went off during the day. The emotional distance between us felt wider than the ocean, even though we were sleeping in the very same bed. My brother Leo noticed the tension too. One afternoon while we were working in my workshop, he handed me a piece of sandpaper and looked at me with a sympathetic expression. "You good man?" Leo asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Everything okay with you and Clara? She seems really stressed lately, like she's looking right through people." I forced a laugh, shoving my hands into my pockets. "Yeah, she's just got a lot on her plate at the clinic. High-risk cases. It takes a toll, you know." Leo nodded slowly, turning back to the workbench. "Yeah, I get it. Just make sure you take care of yourself, big bro. Family is all we got." Hearing those words from my brother brought a brief moment of comfort, a reminder that I had people around me who cared. But that comfort vanished completely the moment darkness fell again, and the heavy rain-slicked silence of the Oregon night settled over our home. The predictability of the routine was what made it truly terrifying. It was a psychological torment waiting for the clock to hit that specific cursed minute. Tonight the rain is coming down harder than usual, a relentless heavy downpour that rattles against the glass and makes the tall pines outside groan against the wind. The house is freezing, the damp cold seeping through the floorboards. I lie perfectly still beneath the heavy blankets, my eyes open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Clara is lying beside me. Her breathing is deep, heavy, and rhythmic, the unmistakable sound of a woman who has finally succumbed to utter bone-deep exhaustion. She had spent the entire evening pacing the hallway, looking out the windows, completely consumed by an invisible anxiety, before finally collapsing into sleep an hour ago. I don't look at the clock, but my chest tightens instinctively. I know the time is drawing near. The silence in the bedroom is immense, broken only by the storm outside, and the soft rise and fall of my wife's chest. Suddenly, a sharp, vibrant buzz cuts through the dark. The nightstand vibrates violently against the wall. The screen of Clara's phone bursts to life, casting a harsh, clinical blue glow across her sleeping face, catching the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the deep lines of stress etched into her forehead. She doesn't stir. The sheer fatigue has locked her into a deep sleep. My heart begins to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath hitches in my throat. This is it. The phone is completely exposed, sitting face up on the wooden nightstand right next to my side of the bed. I slowly, deliberately turn my head to look at the digital display of the alarm clock. 2:13 a.m. The phone vibrates a second time, a short, demanding pulse. The screen stays bright, illuminating the notification banner on the lock screen. I slide my hand out from under the warm blanket, the air hitting my skin like ice. My fingers are trembling so badly I can barely control them. I lean over across the mattress, my eyes locked on Clara's face to ensure she doesn't wake up. My heart pounding so loudly in my ears, I am afraid it will wake her. I reach out and press my palm flat against the cold glass of the screen in lifting the device toward my face. The light blares into my eyes, forcing me to squint. I blink away the brightness, focusing entirely on the text message displayed right there on the locked screen. "I miss you. He's asleep, right. Come out to the backyard." A physical wave of nausea hits my stomach so violent, I have to swallow hard to keep from gagging. The betrayal is real. The lies are real. The advertisements, the clinic updates, the privacy laws, all of it shattered in a single sentence. But as I stare at the words, trying to process the agonizing pain of a broken heart, my eyes drift upward to the top of the notification banner, to the small bold text indicating the sender. My breath completely stops. The blood drains from my face so fast that my vision blurs around the edges, a dizzying, suffocating rush of adrenaline locking my muscles into solid stone. The name on the screen isn't a stranger. It isn't a hidden contact or a random string of numbers. It reads, Leo. My mind fractures, unable to hold the weight of the reality slamming into it. Leo, my younger brother. The man sleeping in the guest house just a few yards away. The man I took and the man I fed, the man I protected. I slowly lower the phone, the cold blue light still bleeding through the gaps of my fingers, and turn my rigid neck toward the bedroom window. Through the heavy glass-paneled pane obscured by the frantic streaks of pouring rain, I look out into the deep, pitch-black abyss of the backyard. Way in the distance, past the wet lawn and the shaking shadows of the pine trees, the single small window of the guest house cuts through the darkness, its interior light burning a steady, silent yellow against the storm. The yellow rectangle of light bleeding through the storm-lashed glass seemed to warp and stretch, burning itself into my retinas until it was the only thing left in the universe. My fingers, clamped like iron claws around the edges of the glowing device, felt completely detached from my body, dead and numb, yet carrying a vibration that hummed straight into my marrow. I didn't drop the phone. I couldn't. It felt welded to my skin, a physical manifestation of a curse that had just rewritten every single memory of my home, my marriage, and my bloodline. The rhythmic, undisturbed breathing of the woman beside me suddenly sounded like a mockery, a cruel metronome where I'm ticking away the final seconds of a life that no longer existed. A terrible hollow quiet expanded inside my skull, swallowing the roar of the Oregon rain, swallowing the howling wind, leaving nothing but the sickening thump of a pulse that felt entirely unearned. I shifted my weight with the agonizing slowness of a man navigating a minefield, the old mattress giving a microscopic groan that made my jaw clench until my teeth ground against one another. I didn't wake her. I didn't scream. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal had bypassed anger entirely, plunging me straight into a cold, clinical state of shock, where survival depended on absolute silence. Slipping my feet onto the freezing hardwood floor, the chill traveled up my spine, a welcome harshness that kept me from fainting as the room tilted violently beneath my feet. I laid the phone back on the nightstand precisely where it had been, aligning its edges with the dust lines on the oak surface so perfectly that no one would ever know it had been moved. My movements were no longer those of a husband. They were the calculated robotic actions of a ghost haunting his own house. Stepping into the hallway, the darkness wrapped around me like a heavy wet blanket. The familiar scent of lavender fabric softener and cedarwood suddenly turning sour in my nostrils. I leaned my forehead against the cool dry wall of the corridor chest, heaving in shallow, silent gasps as the reality of the name on that screen began to tear through my defenses. Leo, my own flesh and blood, the boy I had pulled out of river currents when we were kids, the man whose legal fees I had quietly paid off 2 years ago, without telling our parents, the brother who sat at my table just hours ago, eating the food my hard work provided. The agony was a physical weight, a jagged blade twisting in the deepest part of my gut, leaving me breathless as I stood in the corridor of the home I had built with my bare hands. Every joint in my body ached with an artificial age, the weight of a profound, devastating isolation settling onto my shoulders. I didn't turn on a single light. I navigated the stairs by memory alone, each step a practiced avoidance of the floorboards I knew would squeak my hand, sliding along the polished banister like a blind man seeking a lifeline. When I reached the kitchen, the large panoramic window facing the backyard offered a clearer view of the property, the skeletal silhouettes of the pine trees whipping wildly under the black sky. I pressed my hands flat against the cold granite of the counter, staring out at the small guest house. The light was still on a mocking beacon in the middle of the deluge. I stared at it for what felt like hours, waiting for the door to open, waiting for a shadow to cross the yard, waiting for my life to end completely. But nothing moved. Just the rain, violent and relentless, washing away the illusion of my perfect family. The dawn didn't bring relief. It merely traded the suffocating blackness for a bleak, oppressive gray that drained the color from the walls. I was already sitting at the kitchen table when the first pale streaks of morning light filtered through the blinds, an untouched cup of black coffee sitting before me, cold and filming over. The house began to wake up the small domestic sounds that used to fill me with peace, now triggering a low-grade panic in my chest. I heard the soft rustle of blankets upstairs, the small pattering footsteps of my daughter running down the hall, and then the slow, hesitant steps of my wife. When Clara entered the kitchen, she stopped at the threshold, her eyes scanning my face with an immediate defensive sharpness that she tried to mask with a yawn. She looked exhausted, her skin translucent in the gray light, the dark bruises of sleeplessness under her eyes more pronounced than ever. "Julian, you're up early," she said, her voice small, tentative, carrying an underlying tremor that I had never noticed before, but now found deafeningly obvious. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," I replied, my voice sounding flat hollow, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I kept my eyes fixed on my coffee cup, afraid that if I looked into her bright eyes, the rage would break through the ice and I would destroy everything right then and there. The storm was pretty loud, kept me awake. She walked over to the stove, her movements stiff, calculated, keeping her distance from me as she began to prepare our daughter's breakfast. And the silence between us wasn't the comfortable unspoken understanding of long-time partners anymore. It was an active vibrating wall of glass, thick and dangerous. Every time her phone, which was tucked securely into her back apron pocket, clicked against the counter as she leaned forward, my stomach did a violent flip. I watched the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured the milk, the way she kept glancing out the window toward the back of the property, her entire posture radiating a desperate trapped energy. The back door opened with a sudden, cheerful rattle and Leo stepped into the kitchen, bringing with him the smell of wet earth and cheap cigarettes. He was wearing his flannel shirt, his hair damp from the rain. A wide, easy smile plastered across his face, the same smile that had allowed him to charm his way out of every mess he had ever created in his 30 years of life. "Morning, family," Leo said, his voice booming, full of a synthetic energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He walked right over to the coffee pot, pouring himself a mug, entirely oblivious or entirely indifferent to the invisible fire consuming the room. "Man, that storm was brutal last night. I swear I thought one of those old pines was going to come through my roof." I forced myself to look up, my gaze locking onto my brother's face. I looked at his eyes, looking for any sign of guilt, any twitch of hesitation, any flicker of shame. There was nothing. He looked at me with the same open, brotherly warmth he had shown me since he arrived, entirely comfortable in his skin, entirely comfortable in my house. Yeah, it was rough. I muttered, my hands clenching into fists beneath the table, the fingernails biting so deeply into my palms that I could feel the skin threatening to split. Some things just keep you up at night, no matter how hard you try to close your eyes. Leo took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of the mug, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in his expression occurring before he blinked it away. "Well, you work too hard, big bro. You gotta learn to let things go. Can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders all the time." The hypocrisy of his words felt like a physical blow to my chest, a sickening weight that made it hard to breathe. I looked from Leo to Clara, who was standing by the sink with her back turned to us, her shoulders pulled up tight, her head slightly bowed, completely frozen. The dynamics of the room had changed entirely. I was no longer the protector of this house. I was an outsider in my own life, a spectator watching a silent, grotesque play being performed by the two people I loved most in the world. The days that followed became an exercise in psychological survival. I didn't confront them. The logical, pragmatic side of my brain, the side that measured wood down to the millimeter, knew that a confrontation without absolute, undeniable proof would allow them to twist the narrative. Clara would call me paranoid. Leo would play the victim, and I would be left looking like an unhinged husband destroying his family over a single misread text message. I needed to see the depth of the valley before I jumped into it. I needed to know exactly what I was fighting against. I went to work every day, standing at my workbench, running the electric sander until my hands vibrated, using the loud roaring noise of the machinery to drown out the screaming thoughts in my head. But I wasn't making furniture anymore. My mind was constructing a cage, a methodical, quiet investigation that carried out behind the veil of normalcy. I didn't hire a private investigator. The thought of bringing a stranger into this intimate nightmare felt repulsive, a betrayal of my own dignity. Instead, I used the tools I had. 2 days after the message, while Clara was in the shower and Leo was out of the house, I crept up the creaking stairs to the Gak Mai, the old attic space where we kept the remnants of our past lives. The air up there was thick with dust and the scent of old paper, the rain drumming a frantic, muffled beat against the roof directly above me. I began to search through Clara's old storage boxes, the ones from her college days before she had met me, before our life had settled into this comfortable rhythm. My fingers brushed against an old blue fabric-covered journal hidden deep beneath a stack of old textbooks and clinical manuals. I pulled it out, my heart hammering against my ribs as I opened the cover. The pages were filled with her neat, elegant handwriting, dating back nearly 7 years. I flipped through the pages, my eyes catching names, dates, thoughts of a younger, more vulnerable Clara. And then there it was, a name that appeared on almost every page, written with a passion and a desperation that she had never shown in her letters to me. Leo. The entries painted a picture that turned my world completely upside down. They hadn't met when Leo moved into our guest house a month ago. They had known each other years before. They had met in college in a different city, a whirlwind secret romance that had ended in a devastating, messy breakup, right before Leo disappeared on his multi-year journey across the country. Clara had never mentioned it. When Leo arrived at our house a month ago, she had acted as if he was just her husband's troublemaking younger brother, greeting him with a polite, distant handshake and a formal welcome. It had all been an act, a massive, coordinated lie designed to keep me in the dark about a shared past that had never truly died. I sat there on the dusty floor of the attic, the old journal heavy in my lap, feeling a profound, crushing sense of smallness. The entire foundation of my marriage felt like it had been built on shifting sand. Had she married me just to stay close to him? Was I just the stable, safe choice she made while her heart remained anchored to my brother? The questions tore through my sanity, each one a fresh laceration on an already bleeding heart. The emotional depth of the betrayal shifted from a simple act of infidelity to a long-term, calculated deception that made me question my own identity. Depamunti, I began to take action, silent and invisible. The following weekend, while the family was asleep, I purchased a set of small high-definition security cameras, the kind used for wildlife observation, battery-operated, and completely weatherproof. Under the cover of a thick, foggy night with the Oregon mist clinging to my skin like cobwebs, I mounted them discreetly in the branches of the old pine trees, lining the gravel path that connected our main house to the guest house at the back. I positioned them to cover every angle of the backyard, leaving no blind spots, no room for deniability. The wait was the hardest part. Sitting in my living room during the evening, watching Clara read a bedtime story to our daughter, watching her tuck the sheets around her small shoulders, I felt a sickening split in my reality. I wanted to scream at her to stop pretending to stop polluting our child's world with her falsehoods. But I held it in the anger hardening into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I was no longer a victim waiting to be crushed. I was a hunter gathering the stones for my own defense. On the 4th night after installing the cameras, the storm returned with a renewed vengeance, the rain lashing against the house in sheets, creating a wall of sound that isolated our property from the rest of the world. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the digital clock as the minutes ticked closer to the fateful hour. Clara was asleep beside me, her back turned to me, her breathing shallow and uneven, as if even her subconscious mind was fighting against the weight of her secrets. The clock shifted. 2:13 a.m., right on cue. The muffled low vibration of her phone buzzed beneath her pillow, a sound that felt like a gunshot in the silent room. Clara didn't wake up with a jerk this time. Instead, her eyes opened slowly, deliberately, as if she had been waiting for it in the twilight of her sleep. She remained perfectly still for a few seconds, listening to my breathing, ensuring I was asleep before she slipped her hand beneath the fabric and pulled the device out. I kept my eyes slit, pretending to be locked in a deep slumber, my breath slow and heavy. Through the darkness, I watched the blue light illuminate her pale face as she read the message. She didn't type a reply. Instead, she let out a long, shaky sigh that sounded like a sob caught in her throat, threw off the blankets, and quietly slipped out of the room, her bare feet making no sound on the rug. The moment the bedroom door clicked shut behind her, I lunged across the bed. I grabbed my tablet from the drawer, turning the screen brightness to its absolute lowest setting, and opened the live feed from the backyard cameras. The black and white night vision screen flickered to life, the rain appearing as long, ghostly white streaks cutting across the frame. My eyes locked onto the screen as a figure emerged from our back porch. It was Clara. She was wearing her long, dark winter coat over her pajamas, her hood pulled up against the downpour. She didn't run. She walked with a slow, heavy, almost robotic gait down the gravel path. Her head bowed against the wind, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. The camera angle shifted as she moved deeper into the yard, approaching the small guest house. The light inside the guest house was already on, casting a long, fractured shadow across the wet grass through the glass door. As Clara reached the porch of the structure, the door slid open, and the tall, broad silhouette of my brother Leo stepped into the frame. My fingers dug into the plastic edges of the tablet, the screen flexing under the pressure. As I watched the scene unfold in real time, the absolute silence of the video feed making the imagery even more jarring. They didn't embrace. They didn't move toward each other with the passion of secret lovers. Instead, Clara stopped dead in her tracks, a few feet away from him, her posture rigid, her head snapping up to look him directly in the eyes. Through the grainy rain-streaked night vision footage, I could see the intense, aggressive movement of their hands as they began to argue. Leo stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his face twisting into an expression that looked predatory. Dominant, completely devoid of the easygoing charm he displayed at my dinner table. He raised a hand, pointing a finger directly at her face, his lips moving rapidly as he spoke words I couldn't hear, but whose impact I could see in the way Clara violently flinched backward. She shook her head frantically, her hands coming out of her pockets to push the air between them, her entire body trembling under the force of her emotion. She appeared small, cornered, like an animal, trapped against a wall, while my brother stood over her, his posture radiating a cold, menacing authority that made my blood boil in my veins. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his own phone, and thrust the screen right in front of her face, the bright light of the device illuminating the raw, naked terrors stamped across my wife's features. Clara covered her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she fell to her knees right there on the wet wooden deck of the porch, the rain pouring over her unprotected head. She looked completely broken, a shattered piece of glass at his feet, while Leo stood over her, completely unmoved, his face an emotionless mask as he slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked down at her. I sat there in the dark bedroom, the tablet glowing against my face, watching my wife weep in the mud at my brother's feet. The confusion and the rage collided within me, creating a chaotic, blinding storm that made it impossible to think clearly. This wasn't a romance. This wasn't the secret, passionate affair I had prepared myself to witness. It was something else, something deeply dark and entirely wrong. A dynamic of power and fear that I didn't understand, but that was happening right under my roof in the shadows of my own home. My breathing turned shallow, my muscles locking into a rigid, painful tension as I watched Leo slowly reach down, grab Clara by the upper arm, and violently pull her back to her feet. His grip so tight I could see the fabric of her coat bunching up under his fingers. She didn't fight him off. She just stood there, her head hanging low, her entire spirit seemingly crushed into non-existence, while he leaned in close, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered something that made her entire body go completely rigid. The digital screen in my grip felt like a block of dry ice searing a patch of dead numbness into my palms, while the silent video feed continued its gruesome dance. I didn't breathe. My lungs felt packed with wet sand, tracking the agonizing mechanics of my brother's fingers digging into the wool of Clara's sleeve. The utter silence of the night vision footage stripped away the world, reducing my reality to a grayscale horror show, where every jerk of a limb and every shudder of a shoulders carried the weight of a physical blunt force. When Leo finally released her arm, pushing her slightly backward into the curtain of downpour, the sheer momentum of my fury overcame the paralysis that had chained me to the mattress. I didn't slip out of bed this time. I erupted from it, the tablet tossed onto the pillows as my bare feet hit the floorboards with a heavy, reckless thud that I no longer cared to conceal. The air in the stairwell was thick, smelling of old timber and the metallic tang of the storm that was currently rattling the structural beams of the house. I tore down the steps, my vision tunneling into a bright, white-hot point of pure adrenaline, the carefully maintained caution of the past few weeks burning away in a matter of seconds. I didn't stop in the kitchen to peer through the glass, nor did I reach for a jacket or shoes. I threw the heavy wooden back door open, letting the freezing Oregon deluge hit my bare chest like a volley of small stones. The shock of the cold is doing nothing to dampen the inferno, screaming through my veins. The gravel of the garden path bit deeply into the soles of my feet, each sharp edge a grounding jolt of pain that only served to fuel the single-minded focus guiding my stride through the dark. By the time I reached the bottom of the guest house porch steps, the sound of my heavy, ragged breathing was competing with the thunder rolling over the pine canopy. The two figures on the deck didn't hear me approach over the roaring symphony of the rain, their silhouettes still locked in that tense, suffocating posture of predator and prey. I didn't knock. I didn't give a warning cry. I slammed my weight against the sliding glass door, forcing it open with a screech of metal that cut through the night air like a buzzsaw stepping into the warm, brightly lit interior of the structure, with the rain dripping from my hair and pooling on the clean linoleum. The sudden intrusion shattered the standoff instantly. Clara let out a sharp, choked gasp, her hands flying to her throat as she stumbled backward against the wooden railing, her eyes widening into saucers of absolute terror as she looked at me. Leo, however, recovered his composure with a sickening speed, his face morphing from the cold, aggressive mask I'd seen on the camera back into that familiar, lazy smirk within the span of a single heartbeat. He took a casual step back, sliding his hands into his pockets, though the slight twitch in his jaw told me he hadn't expected the ghost in his house to materialize so soon. "Julian," Leo said, his voice carrying that same smooth, unbothered cadence that had infuriated me since childhood, though it was now laced with a thin veneer of mock concern. "Man, you're soaking wet. What are you doing out here in the middle of a monsoon, big bro? You almost scared us to death." "Shut up, Leo," I whispered, the words coming out low, gravelly, vibrating with a quiet hatred that surprised even myself. I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked onto Clara, whose entire body was shaking so violently I thought she would collapse into a heap right there on the floorboards. "Clara, get inside the main house. Now." "No, Julian, wait, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking completely as she reached out a trembling, mud-stained hand toward me, her knuckles white with fear. She didn't move toward the door. Instead, she looked between me and Leo with a desperate, frantic pleading that only made the knot in my stomach tighten until it felt like a stone. "It's not what you think. Please just listen to me. Don't do this." I saw the message, Clara. I said each word, a heavy drop of lead falling into the space between us, the cold reality of the admission drawing the remaining airs from the room. I saw the clock hit 2:13. I saw what he wrote, and I saw him put you on your knees out here. "I'm not asking you again. Go to our daughter. I will deal with my brother." Leo let out a soft, mocking chuckle, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, the sheer arrogance of his posture making the blood pound behind my ears like a sledgehammer. "Come on, Julian, don't be like that. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. It's just a family discussion. No need to get your hands dirty." Before the last syllable could leave his lips, the restraint that had guided my entire life evaporated. I closed the distance between us in a single explosive motion, my hand launching forward to grip the collar of his flannel shirt, bunching the fabric into my fist and slamming him hard against the wall behind him. A framed print of the Oregon coast rattled against the drywall, shifting on its nail as Leo's head cracked against the surface. The lazy smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden sharp flash of genuine panic as he realized the quiet, submissive older brother he had spent his life manipulating was gone. "Julian, stop, you're going to kill him," Clara shrieked, lunging forward to grab my arm, her small fingers digging into my bicep with a surprising, frantic strength that managed to anchor my fist before I could swing. She didn't pull away. Instead, she threw her entire body between us, pressing her back against Leo's chest and facing me with a countenance so raw, so utterly destroyed by grief and terror that it stopped me dead in my tracks. "He didn't touch me like that. He's tongtien me, Julian. He's taking everything we have." The word hung in the air, grotesque and heavy, clashing violently with the warm golden light of the guest house lamp. Blackmail. The sheer absurdity of the statement rippled through my anger, stalling the momentum of my muscles and leaving me standing there, my fist still tangled in my brother's collar, staring down at my wife. "What did you just say?" I breathed, my voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator in the small kitchen corner. Clara dropped her head against my chest, her shoulders shaking as she let out a long, ragged wail that sounded like it had been buried in the depths of her soul for a century. "The money, Julian. The savings for the new workshop expansion. He knows about it. He knows everything. And if I don't give it to him, he's going to destroy us. He's going to take our daughter away." I slowly let go of Leo's shirt, stepping back a pace as my mind struggled to reorient itself, the pieces of the puzzle spinning wildly before slamming together into a completely different picture than the one I had spent weeks torturing myself with. I looked at Leo, who was now straightening his collar with a trembling hand, his eyes darting toward the open door as he realized his leverage was slipping through his fingers. The easygoing, wandering brother was gone. In his place stood a pathetic, desperate creature, cornered and malicious. "Tell him, Leo." Clara whispered, her voice suddenly turning cold, hollow, devoid of any remaining respect, as she turned her head to look at the man behind her. "Tell your brother what you showed me on your phone tonight. Tell him about the photos." Leo spat on the floor, a bitter, defensive sneer, twisting his lips as he realized the game was up. "It's just business, Julian. You always had everything handed to you. The house, the business, the perfect little family. You think you're better than me because you spend your days sanding pieces of wood I needed a way out. And your little wife here was the perfect ticket. Clara turned back to me, her eyes red-rimmed and fierce under the harsh light. He's been deep in debt for years, Julian. The people he owes money to in Seattle, they aren't just collectors, they're dangerous. When he found out you had that money sitting in the bank, he came here with a plan. He took old photos of me from college, from when we were together before I ever knew you existed, and he used some digital AI software to alter them. He made them look monstrous. He made them look like things that would destroy my clinic license, things that would make the child welfare services take our daughter away in a second if they ever leaked online. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hand coming up to touch the bruise beginning to form on her upper arm, where Leo had gripped her moments before. He texted me every single night at 2:13 a.m. because he knew that was when the automated server logs at my clinic updated, so if you ever saw the notification, I could blame it on the system. He made me come out here in the dark every night to demand more money. He told me if I told you he would send the files to the state licensing board before breakfast. I was trying to protect you, Julian. I was trying to protect our little girl. I didn't want you to see what a monster your brother really is. The weight of her words crashed down on me, a physical pressure that made my knees weaken as the full scope of her silent sacrifice became clear. The emotional depth of her agony wasn't driven by guilt or a hidden passion. It was the pure, unadulterated terror of a mother, trying to shield her child from a predator who happened to share her husband's bloodline. All those weeks of distance, the coldness, the rigid muscles, when I tried to hold her, it wasn't rejection. It was the absolute exhaustion of a woman carrying a mountain on her back, entirely alone in the dark, trying to keep the debris from crushing the life we had built. I looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing past the mud and the tears to the incredible fierce bravery that had kept her standing through this nightmare. The self-doubt and the toxic jealousy that had poisoned my thoughts for the past month burned away, leaving behind a clean, sharp clarity. She hadn't broken our marriage. She had been trying to hold the walls up while the foundation was being systematically undermined by my own family. A profound shift occurred inside my chest, the jagged edges of my broken heart fusing back together into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous than simple anger. I turned my gaze slowly back to Leo. He was standing near the small kitchen counter, now his fingers hovering near a heavy ceramic mug, his eyes still calculating, still searching for an opening, a lie, a way to spin this back into his control. You used her. Leo. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, the calmness of my delivery far more chilling than the violence of my earlier outburst. You came into my house, you ate my food, you played with my daughter, and every single night you crept out here to terrorize the woman who gave you a place to sleep. Hey, she's the one who kept the secret, Julian, Leo hissed, his voice rising in pitch as the panic began to take over completely, his bravado crumbling down to the bedrock of his cowardice. She could have told you on day one. She's the one who lied to you for a month. If anyone broke your precious little trust, it was her. I didn't answer him. The words didn't matter anymore. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my own phone, which had remained dry inside my flannel trousers, and unlocked the screen. The bright display illuminated the small room, catching the glint of sweat on Leo's forehead as he watched my thumb move across the glass. I didn't open the camera app. I opened the external storage drive, where the live feeds from the backyard wildlife cameras were being automatically backed up, and I turned the screen toward him, letting him see the crystal clear, high-definition footage of him thrusting his phone into Clara's face, the unmistakable stance of intimidation, and the clear image of his hand, violently grabbing her arm and dragging her off her knees in the middle of the downpour. The cameras in the pine trees have audio recording Leo, I said, lying with a perfectly flat stone-like face that gave away absolutely nothing. Every single word you just said about the photos, every demand for the workshop, money, every threat against my daughter, It's already sitting on a cloud server 3 miles from here. Leo's face went entirely white, his mouth dropping open slightly as his eyes darted from the screen to my face, realizing that the digital cage he had built for Clara had just snapped shut around his own neck. He took a slow step backward, his hip hitting the edge of the kitchen counter, his hands coming out of pockets to reveal palms that were slick with cold sweat. The storm outside seemed to reach a crescendo, a massive clap of thunder, shaking the guest house windows so violently that the glass groaned against the rubber seals. Clara moved closer to me, her hand sliding down my arm until her cold, wet fingers locked into mine. Her grip tight, desperate, but no longer terrified. She was standing with me now, the secret out, the burden shared, leaving the two of us to face the monster in the room together. I lowered the phone, my eyes never leaving my brother's face as I felt the steady calm rhythm of my own breathing return the utter clarity of the moment, dictating my next move with absolute certainty. I could feel the cold water from my hair dripping down my neck, but I didn't feel the chill anymore. The only thing left was the solid, unyielding weight of a husband who had finally found the thread to pull his family out of the dark. The golden illumination of the lamp overhead did not soften the stark reality of the trap that had just snapped shut around the man cowering against my kitchen counter. Leo stared at the digital display in my hand, his breathing turning into a shallow, wet rattle that sounded pathetic compared to the commanding voice he had used to terrorize my wife just minutes prior. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence seemed to leak out of him, leaving behind a hollow, desperate shell that looked small under the high ceilings of the guest house. I did not move an inch, nor did I lower the device, letting the silent rolling footage of his own malice serve as an unyielding wall between him and any remaining lies he might try to construct. Clara's fingers remained tightly interwoven with mine, her wet coat pressing against my side, a grounding warmth that anchored my shifting soul back into the real world. "You're bluffing," Leo finally choked out, his voice cracking as he tried to summon a fraction of his former bravado, though his eyes kept darting toward the sliding glass door, measuring the distance into the dark, rainy night. "You wouldn't put your own brother in a cage, Julian. Think about Mom. Think about what this would do to the family name. We can fix this right here. Just delete the files and I'll leave. I'll vanish and you'll never see my face again. The family name died for me the second you put your hands on my wife." I said, my tone completely level, lacking any trace of the explosive anger that had driven me down the gravel path. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the movement smooth and deliberate before turning slightly to look at Clara. Her face was still streaked with rain and dirt, but the raw, trembling terror had begun to solidify into a quiet, unyielding dignity. "Clara, walk up to the main house. Call the county sheriff's department. Tell them we have a domestic extortionist secured on the property, and that we have full digital documentation of physical intimidation and financial coercion ready for the arriving officers." She didn't hesitate for a single second. She squeezed my hand. One last time, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the bond we had just reclaimed in the middle of the wreckage, and stepped toward the shattered sliding door. Leo made a sudden frantic movement, as if to lung forward and block her path, his fingers reaching out like claws, but I simply stepped into his line of sight, my broad frame cutting off his trajectory entirely. The sheer physical presence of a man who spent his days hauling heavy timber was enough to make him stall, his boots skidding slightly on the slick linoleum as he realized he was utterly outmatched. Clara slipped into the pouring rain without a word, her dark silhouette swallowed by the Oregon mist as she sprinted toward our home to protect our daughter. Left alone in the room with the ghost of my childhood, the silence between us stretched out heavy and absolute, punctuated only by the rhythmic thumping of the downpour against the metal roof. Leo collapsed backward against the counter, his legs seemingly losing the strength to hold his weight, his head dropping into his hands as a low, bitter laugh escaped his throat. "You think you've won, don't you?" he muttered, looking up through a tangled mess of damp hair, his eyes reflecting a poisonous blend of envy and defeat. "You get to play the hero again. Julian the Builder. Julian the Savior. You always got the straight path while I had to scratch and claw for every single scrap. You have no idea what it's like to live in the dirt." "I carved my own path out of the dirt, Enoch," I replied, standing perfectly still near the center of the room, my arms crossed against my chest, to keep the damp chill from settling into my muscles. I spent 10 years sleeping on a mattress in the back of my workshop, breathing in sawdust and eating canned beans just to build something honest. You didn't fall into the dirt. You chose to crawl into it because you thought cheating was faster than working. You looked at my life, my wife, and my savings, and you thought you could just steal the finished product without ever understanding the labor it took to create it. Within 20 minutes, the distant wailing sirens of the Clackamas County police cruisers began to cut through the heavy roar of the storm, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pine needles as the vehicles tore up our gravel driveway. The flashing colors strobed against the windows of the guest house, casting an eerie clinical glow over the small room. When the deputies entered their flashlights, drawing long beams through the damp air, I handed over the digital drive containing every second of the 2:13 a.m. footage, along with the unaltered logs from Clara's phone. Watching the handcuffs click around Leo's wrists did not bring me a surge of triumph. It brought only a profound, heavy sense of relief, a final severing of a parasitic vine that had been trying to choke the life out of my sanctuary. By the time the cruisers backed down the driveway, taking my brother away into the gray breaking dawn, the storm had finally begun to exhaust itself. The heavy downpour dissolved into a soft, misting drizzle that hung over the mountains like a veil of smoke. I walked back up the garden path, the sharp gravel beneath my bare feet, no longer feeling like a punishment, but rather a reminder that I was alive, that I was standing on my own ground, and that the nightmare was over. I pushed open the back door of the main house and stepped into the kitchen. The room was warm, the smell of fresh coffee beginning to combat the stale chill of the long night. Clara was sitting at the wooden table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her hair dried and wrapped in a soft towel. Our daughter was still upstairs, sleeping peacefully, entirely unaware that her world had been defended and saved while she dreamed. I walked over to my wife, slipping into the chair beside her. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. I simply reached out and she slid her hand into mine, her skin warm and dry this time. We sat there as the first genuine sunlight of the morning broke through the clouds, painting the kitchen walls in soft golden hues that erased the cold blue shadows of the past month. Looking back on those terrifying weeks, I realized that the human heart is a complex, fragile thing, much like the wood I work with every day. Sometimes, a structure can look completely solid on the outside while a hidden rot is eating away at the core. But if the foundation is laid with true, unyielding honesty, you can strip away the ruined pieces and rebuild something even stronger from the remains. Secrets don't protect the people you love. They only build a wall of isolation that leaves you vulnerable to the wolves waiting in the dark. It takes an immense amount of courage to face the ghosts of the past together, but it is the only way to ensure they never have the power to hunt you again. Now that the storm has cleared and the silence in our home is finally filled with peace, I have to ask you a final question. If you discovered that the threat to your family was coming from inside your own bloodline, would you have the strength to cut the tie completely to save your partner, or would the pressure of family loyalty make you hesitate? It is a heavy question, one that forces us to look at the true definition of love and duty. I would love to read your honest thoughts, so please leave a comment down below and let's start a conversation. Your perspectives mean the world to me, and they remind us all how critical it is to guard the sanctuaries we build. Thank you for staying with me through this deeply personal journey. If this story touched you or reminded you of the value of truth in a relationship, please hit that subscribe button, give the video a like, and turn on the notifications so you never miss our next chapter. Take care of yourselves and protect the ones you love. Enobain po.